your teacher will really only talk about 70 of them or 50 of them or whatever. So you'll notice what the teacher focuses on is probably what's going to be more important. So when you study later on, you're not reading the whole thing all over again, which is a huge waste of time. Okay. And another thing is use the questions in the back of the book to help you. Ask, actually, at the end of sections, usually there's like a summary question. Answer the question verbally out loud. It's hard to answer questions, at least for me, in my head. Answer them out loud. Do you get it? Did you read it? Did you understand it? If you find yourself stuck and you're not understanding what you've just read a few minutes ago, then you need to be reading a little bit more carefully. Everybody has different reading speeds, so it depends on you for what is comfortable. As you're reading, here's a helpful suggestion. Use imagery. This is so cheesy and sort of lame, but it's called visual associations. So I'm going to look up my example that I have written here. But for example, when you're reading about, let's say, the Boston Tea Party, 1773, imagine in your head the sailing boat. Imagine the American Indians throwing the tea over the side. Imagine in your head, picture the numbers 1773 in like bright red. Okay, hear the waves. Don't obviously do this for all of your history books, but sometimes for every single thing. But sometimes they're going to be more important events than others. For the really important events, visualize it. The more you can visualize it, the more you'll be able to remember. Basically, I did a lot of research on why we remember things and why we don't. The more ways you can tie an image the more ways you can tie a memory down, the easier it is to remember. For example, so don't just read it. If you just read it, it's really easy to forget. But if you can imagine it, if you can hear it, the more ways you teach it to yourself, the more ways, the easier you'll be able to remember it, and the longer you'll be able to remember it. Next, as you are, and now I'm sort of moving on to studying tips. Okay, so let me review. First of all, night before, do the reading, take notes. In class, don't take so many notes. Listen, so you can ask yourself, do I have questions? Do I understand something? Is there something different that the teacher said that the book didn't say? Is the teacher mentioning things that isn't even in the book? Okay, circle things in your notes from the night before that the teacher mentions, especially highlight or star or draw circles around things when the teacher says, this is really important or this will be on the test. When you get home after class, a lot of times what you'll do is reread your notes. Just look them over again, okay? And you should be able to do at this point, you've already read the book and you listened and you paid attention in class. So you should be able to do the homework really, really quickly. If you find yourself still struggling with homework, whether it's science or history, then you've probably made a mistake in one of the steps that I just mentioned. This is an optional thing, but sometimes I do this. When you get home and you're reviewing your notes, write a little summary on top or at bottom or in the margins, scroll down, summary. Basically, today we learned about the significance of the Boston Tea Party. Okay. Now, I'm going to move on to studying. When you study, please, again, like I said earlier, do not reread the whole textbook. I remember when I was in honors bio, sometimes for a test, I had to read, there were over 150 pages. There's just no way I could read 150 pages in a night, or even 2 nights, or even 3. So don't read the whole thing. You're wasting your time. What ends up happening in class? Oh yeah, I remember reading about that, but too bad I don't remember the answer. This happens to me all the time, and it's so frustrating when it was like, I remember the question's familiar, the answer choices are familiar, but not the actual answer. And of course, in a test, almost being correct is still wrong. Okay, so let me teach you the ways I found that really, really helped. When you study, almost always in history, the exact date is not super, super important. If there is a specific date that is important, usually the teacher will say, and maybe big things like, hey, the start of World War I, it's the start of World War II, the beginning of the Revolutionary War. These are some major, huge world-changing events. Maybe those, but remember the dates. Otherwise, it's so important to remember the time frame. So many times I ask my students, so what decade? What decade did this event take place? And it's a complete empty, I have no idea. Know the decade, because oftentimes, especially if your teacher likes to give free response or essay questions, and for some of my middle schoolers out there, you probably don't have too much of this, but in high school, and especially for the AP, when you're preparing for the AP, there are going to be essay questions. No one's going to be impressed if you can say, oh, look, the Boston Tea Party happened in 1773, or whatever. If you get the decade wrong, or worse yet, if you get the century wrong, you're going to screw up the entire rest of the exam. So do yourself a favor, know the time frame, do not memorize a specific date. It's a waste of time. Next thing, place. Use your five senses. This sounds, again, cheesy, but picture it in your head. Picture. What are the people wearing? What kind of music do people listen to? Maybe play some of the music that was from this era. Do the little things to try to make it fun. Try to make it like a little story in your head. I always thought of, I loved history in class. I still do. And I always kind of think of it as like a big story time for like big kids. What are the things that make this thing interesting? I mean, history is a study of things that actually happened. So these things did happen. So why? Okay, now just like I said earlier, this is the most important thing I'm about to say in this entire video. At 15 minutes and 33 seconds, most important thing. Do not, whatever you do, if you ignore all my other advice, do not forget this. When you study cause and effect, do not memorize facts. Do not just memorize fact by fact. I know some people that make like thousands of note cards and you just memorize them. Don't do that. Please don't do that. It's not going to last you for the rest of your life. It just won't. It won't, especially in college. It really won't last, okay? Here's the way I do it. And this worked really, really well for me studying for the AP exam. And I did get a perfect score on the AP. So I do know what I'm talking about. When you study, know the cause and effect. So don't memorize this event took place in this date and was led by this person. Know the effects. What are the events leading up to so let's say, for example, you're studying the World War II. It's not so important to know the battles, the specific every battle, how many people died. That's not important. What's really important is why did it happen? What 4 events led to World War II? On my website, and I'll send you all a version of this, but I'll list a bunch of questions to help you remember study. So for example, what were the events leading up to X? What events caused X to happen? What were the outcomes and the effects growing out of these events? So for example, what were the effects after World War II? What happened? Okay, and let me give you a reason why I study this way. In a test, if the question is, is something really specific and you didn't study it, you're like, oh no, I don't remember that. I didn't memorize that one fact. If you know all the causes and effects, you've created a web, okay? This is something my AP History, my APUSH teacher told me, and it's been so helpful. When you study, you're trying to create a web of information so that if something on the test shows up that's not quite what you studied, you have a web. You'll catch it. You'll figure it out. You'll use the information you do know to find out information that you don't know. If you study the way like shooting a bow and arrow, you study one fact at a time. If the test doesn't ask that one exact question, you're screwed. You have no idea what the answer is. Okay, so try to build yourself a web, and you have to know the cause and effects in order for this to happen. I have more questions for you on online that can help you study. So for example, did this event cause another event? What is the long-term significance of this event? How do these events impact people living today? When studying about important people, again, it's not super important to know everything about, everything details. It's most important to know their impact. Everybody makes it into the people that you read about now today in history books. They were really, really important. They had impact. Okay, what influences do they have on us today? What influences did they have on people then? Why are they important? Why are we reading about them? Okay, and this is true for science as well as, even though, there's less people that you study in science. Same thing, okay? And don't memorize people in isolation. What events, what discovery did they make in science? What were they a general in a war? Link the people to the events, okay? And then when you're done studying, after each section, summarize it, generalize it for your brain. Give your brain something to grab onto, okay? So for example, this was essentially a period of westward migration, or this was an era of conquest, or this was a period of a decade of intense intolerance, or this was an area of racial bias, or this is a period when people from Eastern European countries overcame communism and tried something new. Or this is a period of nuclear war. Whatever it is, give yourself some sort of connection, some sort of general comment to help you remember, okay? And then draw connections. Is this event similar to something you've read in the past? How is this connected to the other things that you've been studying? The more connections you can draw for your head,